Greetings, fellow freethinkers. The event you're about to watch was hosted by the Centre for Inquiry Ontario, an educational and outreach organization dedicated to promoting and defending science, reason, and free inquiry in every area of human endeavor. My name is Justin Trottier, and as Executive Director of CFI Ontario, I would like to take a minute to tell you about us. Our centre, located in the heart of downtown Toronto, is the first Canadian branch of CFI and is our nation's first dedicated meeting and event space for humanists and freethinkers. Our mandate encompasses a robust public education presentation series throughout Ontario, campus outreach as we support a growing network of student freethought groups, community outreach and social services to provide humanistic alternatives to religiously monopolized services and activities, and a lending library and media center that, among other things, broadcasts videos like this across the planet. To learn more, please visit us at cfiontario.org. To get on our email list or to learn how you can support our movement or get a freethought group started at your campus, simply contact us today at info@cfiontario.org. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Hello? Oh, sweet. Yeah, we're gonna
You
get.
just have to tell us to sit. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Sit now.
We're starting.
Now. Anyway. Alright, so last time I was up here when Tom Flynn was speaking, I made somewhat of a comment regarding my looks relative to Justin. Word that apparently got back to him regarding my better looks. So this time I won't comment on that, I'll just let you see for yourself. So then you can't complain. So welcome to CFI, especially if you haven't been here before. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I'm guessing most of you have. If you don't know, as the sign says, and as we always say, CFI's goal is promoting reason, science, and freedom of inquiry in every human endeavor. And a lot of that involves programming like this, whether it be about science, about free expression, about religion, or numerous other topics. Also, we have a lot of social groups, including Secularists for Sobriety, or Coping with Our Religion, or our free ESL classes. Of course, if you want to support the center, we encourage you to become a friend of the center. Our prices are very cheap. It's $60 per person, $20 for students. So really, if you want to help the programming that we do here, that is something we highly encourage you to take out. Going beyond, regarding some of our programming, we have a lot of events coming up. Next week on Thursday is our Flock of Dodos film screening. Following that, we have our Judgment Day Intelligent Design on trial. We also have some lectures coming up, including Edward Tabash's talk regarding the constitutional crisis in the U.S., as well as Dr. David Hitchcock talking on the rich history of atheism that and disbelief that some of us might not be aware of. So anyway, that's enough of me pitching you CFI. That's not the reason you're here. You're here to see George Jaworski talk. Either that, or you're very confused why I'm leading a Polish Combatants Association night, which I would direct you down the street. So George, this could be the Polish Combatants Association.
I thought that's where we were.
Really? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, sorry, the event's cancelled. So George Jaworski is obviously here to talk to you about the future of impacts of technology and it will have on our species. The blurb I was given talks about him as being a leading, a gender-driven futurist, a term I'm sure not a lot of us are very aware of, and I'm sure he'll elaborate exactly what that encompasses. He's been very busy founding things. He's a co-founder of the Toronto Transhumanist Association, Better Human. He's editor-in-chief of Better Humans website, which I encourage you to go to. He's also on the board of directors for the World Transhumanist Association and on the board of directors as well for the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He's written for numerous publications. I won't bore you with that long list. So we're very honored to have him here tonight and enlighten us on some of these topics. So please welcome George Jaworski. stealing his notes there for a second.
Hello everybody, thank you for being here tonight on this beautiful April evening. Just a quick show of hands, how many here have, prior to this event, had heard of the term transhumanism? Okay, that's quite a bit. I think that's pretty encouraging, but it's probably also emblematic of the kind of the crowd that's here. That we are, again, the center of inquiry for. It is about scientific inquiry and knowledge, and that's really what has sort of led me into the transhumanist movement itself. Okay, cool. Thank you. There are three different, I guess, threads that I want to discuss tonight. There's transhumanism itself, and Justin Trottier asked me to have a particular focus on two subsets of transhumanism, and that is its linkages to humanism, which I can imagine is of great interest to a lot of the people here, being from a humanist community, and being, again, I shouldn't make generalizations about the people that are here from the Center of Inquiry, but perhaps the secular community and so on. So what I'd like to show is that there actually is a sense of continuity between transhumanism and humanist frames of thought. And I've also been asked to address, is that loud? I'm getting a bit of feedback. Is that okay, everybody?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Another subset of transhumanism that I was asked to talk about is a very exciting part of transhumanism, and that is radical life extension. So I'm going to intertwine that into the discussion as well. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to intertwine the humanist discussion in amongst the whole discussion, but we'll address what is transhumanism, where did it come from, and what are its various implications and applications. And then as for, towards the second half of the discussion, it'll be about life extension. What is it, where did it come from, and what are its implications and applications. But in particular as well, I want to talk about the ethical considerations when it comes to radical life extension, as I'm sure that's going to be a great concern to many of you based on what I'm about to tell you, but what we're going to be able to do. And that feedback is killing me.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
hear it now.
Turn the
so
gain
if I
down, turn it
dial
down.
it down just a little. It'll help if you stick your face closer to the bud of the microphone.
Point the mic up.
Yeah, then you can turn down the volume. To make it feel
I don't know
better.
these mics and stuff.
Can someone give him a hand?
Or you can just abandon the mic and speak up. What's up, Ron?
There we go. Okay, how's this? That's better. You got it. Okay. All right, what is transhumanism? Well, roughly it is the idea that technology can and should be applied to improve and expand upon the human condition. Now, in the past, that hasn't really meant much because we haven't really been able to mess with our biology and our genetic constitution all that much, in particular when it comes to things like prostheses and other types of enhancements. But as time goes by, and as our sciences are definitely maturing to an unprecedented level, the opportunity to now not just fix our worn and broken parts and to remedy ourselves, but to actually take the next step and actually start to remodify ourselves and expand upon human capacities is starting to come upon us. The World Transhumanist Association has a great motto that really encapsulates this idea, and their tagline reads, "We want to be better than well." That it's not good enough and it's not acceptable enough for us to simply be just healthy, or what's considered normal human functioning. Is this idea that we can actually take it to the next level and be even better than well, to be fitter than we have been in the past, to have greater cognitive capacity, to have better to have stronger aptitudes for memory and those sorts of other attributes. And I'll talk about all these sorts of items in detail as the talk progresses. It is, and again, it's much more than just that as well. What's happened, and particularly in the last 10 to 15 years or so, is that transhumanism has emerged as an intellectual, as at an international scale, and a cultural movement. So you not only have these discussions happening in the corridors of academia, but you're having a grassroots emergence, that this is becoming the kind of thing that you're hearing more and more as a discussion out on the streets. You're having groups like ours here in Toronto with the Toronto Transhumanist Association emerge, where we just have regular folk from different types of walks of life are coming here to talk about what the ramifications are and what the implications are of future tech on them and on society. We talk about it, and There are even some involved in our community that are actually involved in bringing some of these technologies to existence. And again, it is also, in many respects, simply an outlook, this general outlook that is in support of new sciences, to broaden our scientific understanding, but in particular how our scientific understandings can help us develop those kinds of technologies, those biotechnologies, that will get us to enhance human mental and physical abilities and aptitudes. And it even goes into such things as ethics, morality, compassion, broader issues as they pertain to the human condition. How can we use transhumanist type technologies to ameliorate undesirable and unnecessary aspects of the human condition, things like suffering, disease, aging, and involuntary death. And these are all apropos of the discussion, what transhumanism is trying to solve, that there are problems that should be solved. But it goes much further than that. It's much further than genetic modifications and perhaps a prosthetic limb or having a higher IQ. It extends much further into what could be a much more radical future than any of us have really ever thought, or certainly what our ancestors had ever thought possible for the human race and the human condition. And that eventually, and we're not sure actually when this could happen, it could be as little as 50 years from now, it could be much longer, but that we will in fact, due to the application of radically advanced biotechnologies, that we will modify ourselves to such a degree that we will change so much that we will no longer classify as Homo sapiens, that we will emerge as something entirely different, what has been dubbed the post-human. And the post-human is an entity, a future creature that is so far removed from Homo sapien that it can no longer be classified as Homo sapien. That's the term post-human, particularly as it applies to extended capacities and capabilities. So sometimes then you'll see transhumanism referred to as post-humanism. Well, you don't tend to see that very often, as a form of transformational activism influenced by post-humanist ideas. So you do, when I was introduced as being an agenda-driven transhumanist, I'm not sure where that came from, but I'll accept that. And futurists tend to be generalists in terms of the kind of future they'd like to see come about, just in general techno-optimism, as opposed to a futurologist who simply tries to predict the future. I guess what I'm trying to suggest, as a transhumanist activist, I'm actually urging that we develop these sorts of biotechnologies. I think that I'm generally in favor of these sorts of interventions. These are to the individual good and to the social good. So in that sense, I've got an agenda that I'm putting forth in terms of the activistic work that I do. And just lastly as well, on this topic of defining transhumanism, there are, in particular in regards to the post-human, that really what we're talking about as well is something that has moved beyond even the biological. And now we're talking about post-biological evolution and post-biological type creatures, that the normal laws and I guess functions of a biological organism no longer apply, that we're now using different sorts of technologies and different sorts of paradigms that transcend what is meant by biology. And similarly, we're also talking about the end of Darwinism, a post-Darwinian type existence, where natural selection no longer applies. I mean, we're here today as the result, obviously, of trial and error in the evolutionary landscape, through selectional pressures, through great and significant environmental pressures that have crafted us, molded us, given us the brains and the bodies that we have. And that's all fine and well. It's gotten us to where we are today, but you can already see that we're starting to move beyond that and think beyond that particular state of being. That we no longer want to be shaped and molded by environmental pressures. We no longer adhere, certainly not at a social and moral level, to the survival of the fittest mentality. That's immoral, it's unethical, it certainly defies our sense of social justice and so on. And to decommission Darwinism in that respect, I think, is a goal of transhumanists and those who would like to see us take a bit more control over our biological constitutions and how we come about into this world as emotional agents capable of both suffering and of great good, of course, and ability to socialize with each other. So what we replace Darwinism with would be, I guess, a kind of guided evolution that we can figure out for ourselves, is certainly at an individual level, where it is we want to take ourselves. And again, one thing I want to make clear from the outset is that what we're talking about here is the collective result of individual choices, not the result of an authoritarian eugenic agenda. That's a different thing altogether. And sometimes transhumanism does get conflated with eugenics. Eugenics is typically, or exclusively, what happens when you have a very strict authoritarian regime or a dictatorial regime that enforces its vision of what humans should be like and how they should be thinking, and it enforces that on the public and compels them to reproduce in a certain manner, to have certain characteristics that it deems appropriate to society. And certainly we have, in the 20th century, there have been many experiments, some frightful experiments where that was attempted. And one can even make an argument today that China is a eugenic nation, where they, at least they're starting to relax this now, but the one child per couple policy, that's absolutely eugenics. That is a restriction on reproductive processes, reproductive rights. And I do know as well that they're very much on the cutting edge now, at least conceptually, of the biotechnology revolution that is coming. And they most certainly will apply Marxian ideology into their reproductive practices, and you will see, I'm almost sure of it, as long as China remains communist, you will see them apply this sort of idea to a eugenic agenda. So again, I want to just make sure that I've made myself somewhat clear that transhumanism is very much opposed to this sort of idea. That what transhumanists instead would promote is the individual autonomy and choice and access to these technologies where they can make the choices for themselves, what they want for themselves and their families. And again, I'll probably get into that in detail as we continue. Okay, where did transhumanism come from? I mean, it certainly has taken off in the last 10 years or so, but these aren't really new ideas. And they've been talking about this, philosophers, scientists, technologists, really for hundreds of years. And it all got started really with great earnest in and around the Enlightenment era, when you had secular humanism emerge, and you had different ideas emerge about social organization and political organization as well. And why it was a pivotal conceptual turning point, particularly in terms of Western thought, was that there was a shift from religion to humanism. That there was a shift from faith and scripture to science and reason. A shift from passivity to proactivity. And there's the old adage, and this really encapsulates very well what the Enlightenment and what humanism is all about. If we don't play God, then who will? And you do have the rise of secular humanism at this point, and issues of human betterment. And you had a 100-year period. It was a period of great philosophical and intellectual fervor and insight, where you had Europeans and even North Americans brainstorm. It was a collective brainstorming, coming up with how can we actually now use science and technology in ways that can better the human condition. And certainly, due to the scientific and conceptual limitations of the time, they really focused in and around social change. But there were a daring few that actually talked about as well the kind of changes that we could actually undergo as physical organisms. And there's two individuals in particular I want to talk about in just a second. As part of the Enlightenment project as well was the idea that it's okay not to just fix things, but to optimize and improve them as well. And you had the conceptual development of democracy and other democratic arrangements. And of course, the Enlightenment, as we all know, led to a rather epochal point in history, that being the French Revolution and all the various revolutions that fell in Europe thereafter. That's definitely tied into the intellectual movement at the time. And there's also the conviction growing at the time that science and reason could be actually applied to every facet of human existence, not just the social realm, but the biological realm as well. Medicine, human biology. So humanism was at first limited to basic medicine, science, technology, politics, education, social institutions. And today it now extends quite, I think, organically, quite naturally, into the idea of transhumanism and the expansion and enhancement of innate human capacities. Changes to morphology, cognitive ability, our reproductive capacities. Denis Diderot, a remarkable thinker, again during the Enlightenment period, he was a brilliant polymath. And he was, in particular, he was very interested in issues as they pertain to free will. He had a book back in the day called Lettres sur l'Aveugle, where he put forth the theory of variation and natural selection. It was a very primitive take on Darwinian selection. He didn't quite have the nuts and bolts of it down, but he was in fact thinking already about heritability, mutation, and what that meant to the changing of organisms over time. So clearly a man ahead of his time. He actually speculated, talking about ahead of his time, speculated that the blind could be taught to read through the sense of touch. And we all know what came of that. He had deep philosophical wonderings. He was concerned about not just free will, but the ultimate constitution of matter, interested in the meaning of life, all of our favorite subjects. And he contributed to Paul-Henri Thierry's Système de la Nature, the so-called Bible of atheism, And the biggie here, as far as we're concerned, was his book back in 1769, D'Alembert's Dream. It was 3 dialogues that he had written, and it was published posthumously. In this particular book, he talked about evolution, as he had envisioned it, spontaneous generation, which is no longer an idea we buy into, ideas of supreme intelligence, again, speculations about just the degree to which intelligence could advance, and of course psychology and reproduction. He proposed a materialist view of the universe, and again, for some of you hear them and say, like, so what, what's the big deal? But again, this is pretty radical stuff for the mid-1700s. This is a time where religious institutions and religious thought was very much embedded in all facets of life. So to emerge and to propose these sorts of ideas was a bit risky and certainly radical. He speculated about polyp-type creatures, or hybrids as he called them, that combine animal and plant characteristics. I guess what today we'd call chimeras. He was also thinking along the lines of eugenics and crossbreeding, again speculating about mutations leading to changes in species. And again, a century before Darwin put forth his ideas, and certainly long before any conception of genetics and DNA. Again, as a socially progressive person, he saw homosexuality and masturbation as a part of the natural order and virtually harmless. Again, put forth an idea of a materialist and a blank slate theory of mind. He saw the brain as a sort of machine. And again, this is some pretty heady stuff for back then, where vitalism was certainly the order of the day, and certainly back then they would have absolutely no sense at all as to how the brain would actually function. But he deeply believed that at some form, at some level, it was mechanistic in nature. And as such, the mind could be deconstructed and perhaps reconstructed at a later time, preserving identity. How fascinating that somebody was talking about this in the 1700s, whereas today we still have a hard time grasping these ideas, but we're starting to come to grips with it, that this actually is true. And I'll get into this in some detail a little later on in the discussion. Science, he thought, if allowed to develop, could eventually bring the dead back to life. A colleague of his, also French, Marquis de Condorcet, he perhaps best represented the ideals of the Enlightenment. He advocated for a liberal economy, a free and equal system where there's public education, and he was very influential in France, putting forth ideas of constitutionalism and constitutional law. But he also advocated for reason. He felt that by applying reason to our day-to-day lives and to our sciences, reason would liberate us from the church, would liberate us from authoritarianism, and, interestingly for us here, would liberate us from nature. So nature put right up there with the church and authoritarianism as an oppressive force, as something that constrains us, harms us, limits us. And that if we simply apply our faculties to the problem, we will step by step, problem by problem, overcome the hardships imposed on us by the natural order. His other ideals included, he was a brilliant mathematician and a political scientist. He fused the two together. He was one of the first, in fact, he probably was the first person to use math in the studies of social science. So again, thinking that science, mathematics, can be applied to understand the social condition. Again, ideas that are still radical today. Take, for example, the whole idea of sociobiology as proposed by Jared Diamond in the early 70s. In the early 1970s, we received huge flack for attempting to understand and study the human species through a scientific frame. He did talk about the perfectibility of society, although he did not provide any strict definition of what he meant. It's funny, it's falling so that's pretty funny, actually. He didn't provide any strict definition of what he meant by a perfect human existence, but what he did put forth was the idea that humanity, as long as it applies science and reason, can continually expect to progress and refine itself. That was something that he would advocate. And needless to say, his ideas were very influential, particularly on that of Thomas Malthus. When Malthus got wind of Condorcet, it prompted him to put his paper together on Malthusian theory and unsustainable population growth, because he figured he was onto something. Nature has set no term to the perfection of human faculties. The perfectibility of man is truly indefinite, and the progress of this perfectibility from now onwards, independent of any power that might wish to halt it, has no other limit than the duration of the globe upon which nature has cast us. This is considered, his book, was one of the major texts of the Enlightenment and of historical thought. He narrates the human civilization as one of progress in the sciences, shows the intimate connection between scientific progress and the development of human rights and justice, and outlines the features of a future rational society entirely shaped by scientific knowledge. So that's the legacy. That's where we came from in terms of this particular school of thought. That's how it was framed back in the humanists that emerged during the period of the Enlightenment. And his ideas were largely forgotten or lost, or simply we were unable to actually act on these ideas until recently. Now we all know, certainly to a certain degree, about how technologies can enhance or expand our lives. I mean, we're all here very much part of the technological world, and we realize that we're far removed from our state of nature. We do realize that. But there are, I guess, 4 different ways we can kind of conceptualize, at least from a cybernetic perspective, how we can use pending biotechnologies and even current technologies to change our biological makeup. Of course, there are things like external devices. There are shoes, glasses, bicycles, exoskeletons, those sorts of things. There's also chemical management, diet drugs, gene therapy. We can influence our moods. We can alleviate psychological disorders. These are all very powerful and very welcome interventions that we can make. And then looking further afield, and even current modern day, I mean, cybernetics is here, it's happening right now. Implanted devices, neural interfaces, nanomedicine, prosthetics and other assistive devices, neural implants like deep brain stimulation. Deep brain stimulation is a procedure now, we're not quite sure why it works, but we know it does work, is it can treat conditions such as Parkinson's and alleviate tremors, for example. And what happens is that basically it's a brain pacemaker, that's even what they call it. And it's a device that gives off a bit of an electrical charge, and what the surgeons do is they open you up, assuming that you have, let's say, a Parkinson's tremor. And you are expected to be awake during the surgery because they need you to respond to them. And they open you up, and because it's still somewhat voodoo going on in there, we still don't understand the human brain completely. They ask the individual to hold up their hand, and the hand tremors, and they know they're in the right spot in the brain. They're stimulating the right spot in the brain when the tremors stop. They've located the area, they implant the brain pacemaker, it's giving off a steady little charge, they sew you back up, and tremor is actually solved. It's that unbelievable, and it is happening today. They're finding that it is having peripheral benefits as well, and they're already thinking of how they're going to use this with things like Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions. Cybernetics, implants in the brain. There's also the potential for implanting chips for communication, tracking, and enhancement purposes. For example, memory enhancement chips, and there was an article just yesterday in the New York Times on this topic. And there's also the possibility for neuroprostheses for various reasons. For example, failing neurons, failing cellular components in the brain can be offset and offloaded to synthetic components. Imagine that. And I believe they've already had artificial neurons created in the lab where your actual thoughts will no longer be your thoughts will no longer be processed through biological substrate. It will be a synthetic analog where your thinking process are actually happening. And of course, then there's going to be redesign altogether. Reconstructive surgery, inheritable genetic engineering, things like designer babies and so on. What kinds of technologies will really help bring this about? Well, back in 2003, there was a rather remarkable paper put out by the NSF in the United States, the National Science Foundation. And I'm still amazed that they got this out, particularly that they got it out under the Bush regime. The Bush regime, who did their darndest to set up the most conservative ethical program in the history of the United States, to halt any kind of biotechnological development. I'm sure many of you are aware of the stem cell roadblocks that they put up and so on, and the kind of political morass that created. My life story, by the way.
You tighten it in one fold.
It's ridiculous.
There's also a height adjustment that you can alter.
There we go. Thank you. So the NSF published this remarkable paper back in 2003 called NBIC Convergence. and in which not only did they outline the kinds of technologies that are soon to arrive that will dramatically alter what it means to be human, but they actually were in support of this. This was what they hoped would be opening up the conversation for what they thought would be the accelerating convergence of all these technologies for enhancing human performance across all fields. And this was a bit of a, like a hand grenade went off, and it created quite a ruckus, both in terms of the advocates for it and in terms of its critics. What they argued was that there were going to be a number of key technologies that will converge together to really create this new human. Psychopharmacology, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and the cognitive sciences. And like I said, they were supportive of this, but they were soundly criticized by the more conservative quarters. Now, many of you might be asking, and I have touched upon some of these issues already, when it comes to talk of transhumanism, to what end? Why? Why bother? I mean, why are we not fine the way we are? And I'm sure that's typically the number one concern that I hear for those new to the suggestion. As I thought about it, I came up with really 5 different ways of justifying it, I think, where it not only just becomes not just a frivolous want, but rather an important ethical issue, an important legal issue, and an issue of social justice. It comes down to our reproductive rights, our morphological freedoms, our cognitive liberties. It becomes an issue of reducing suffering and maximizing human experience and potential. And I'm now going to shift. Actually, I'm going to go back just a little bit. I kind of skimmed over that too much. What do I mean by reproductive rights? Well, it's not just things like the right to birth control. It's more profound things like IVF, in vitro fertilization, which back in the day, in the 70s, many of you will remember, the brouhaha that erupted over test tube babies, and how this was going to usher in a brave new world, and a whole political lobby emerged in opposition to this. The hysteria about it was quite intense. And now, today, we no longer refer to this test tube babies, we call it IVF, and just last year, 200,000 Americans were born in this particular manner. So it is reproductive technologies as well, and it will in the future encapsulate such things as genetic modifications, designer babies, cloning, and other types of novel interventions in our reproductive processes. Then there's issues of morphological freedoms, things like cybernetic enhancement, life extension, and cosmetic surgery. Any changes that I deem fit to my own body, if I want to change my body. And again, it could mean even things like radical body modification through things like tattoos, or changing the pigment of my skin or hair color. These are all different ways of applying these sorts of technologies. And interesting is that the radical body modification people have very much caught on to the whole transhumanist thing. When we had our conference here, our international conference in 2004, we had a community of the body mod group come out, and they were interested to know how can they change the color of their skin? How can they kind of twist what's normal in terms of morphology? It was really quite fascinating. Cognitive liberties, things like enhancing your IQ, your memory, having alternative psychological spaces and experiences alternative psychological spaces and experiences, a shift away from what is heretofore regarded as neurotypicality. Reduce suffering, reducing the ravages of aging, better pain management, alleviating such problems as that disease causes. And when it comes to maximizing experience and potential, there's the reduction of genetic arbitrariness. That we find the genetic lottery to be arbitrary and repugnant. It's an issue of social justice and a way to further democracy. To see lives flourish and not constrained by disability or latent biological limitations. And now I'm going to shift to the subset of transhumanism, and that is life extension. More appropriately, radical life extension. And to that end, that would qualify, I guess, here under morphological freedoms, the right to preserve your body at a particular state of being. That one would also argue that life extension is a way to reduce suffering and the ravages of aging, and even, of course, the stress of facing our mortality and dying, and even reducing the suffering of those around us who don't want to see us go just quite yet. And of course, maximizing human experience and potential. That doesn't really need much of an elaboration aside that you can't really do much. You can't really maximize and experience much when you're not alive. Okay, what is life extension? And this is surprisingly prone to a lot of misunderstanding. ultimately, it's about significantly expanding the length of healthy human lifespan. It's about slowing down or even halting the aging process. What has been called negligible senescence. Senescence being a fancy word for aging. And of course, negligible meaning barely noticeable. So a state of being where our aging is barely noticeable, where we're basically at a fixed age. Now, it is not about extending decrepitude, and this is a common misconception. The idea that what we're talking about is, that's a great word. Every time I have an opportunity to use the word decrepitude, I'm there. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. That we're not talking about what Francis Fukuyama, actually probably the world's #1 opponent of transhumanism, would call the creation of a nursing home world. We're absolutely not talking about that. We're not talking about extending aged people to even more extreme levels of frailty. It's about, again, not just slowing down and halting the aging process, but actually achieving a biological age that's desirable. I would say, for me personally, perhaps 24, but that's up to you. And ultimately, it's also about making death a voluntary choice. And this is another idea, is that everyone gets all upset about the idea of everyone living forever, or could you even say that we would live forever? And transhumanists, as a result, tend to shy away from such terms as forever and immortality, and prefer such terms as negligible senescence. They've been talking about death as a voluntary choice. So basically, death no longer being an imposition, but rather something that we'll decide when it is right for us after, let's say, maybe 500, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. Who's to say that that's enough? It's time to perhaps part with this mortal coil.
Part with this immortal coil.
Part with this mortal coil.
Immortal coil.
Part with the
Immortal coil.
mortal.
It's not mortal if you're not aging anymore.
I mean, that's true. You can part with actually, you're absolutely right. Parting with the immortal coil. Yes. We are in the midst of this revolution right now, and there are 3 waves in which a radical life extension will come about. One has already happened, and the 2 are yet to come. The first wave happened in the 20th century, when at the dawn of the 20th century you had a life expectancy in and around 40 to 45 years old. By the end of the 20th century, it was not uncommon to see people living well into their 70s and 80s with regular frequency, if not even further. Why did this happen? Well, we had a number of conceptual breakthroughs in health, namely better hygiene, medical advances such as surgery. We started to develop more sounder ideas as it pertained to germ theory. And of course, we have vaccinations. And by the way, I'm imagining, and I'm certainly hoping that everyone in this room is vaccinated. And if you don't think that transhumanism is coming, or that even you yourself are not a transhuman, you are absolutely transcending your limits of human biology by having vaccinations. You have a super immune system. You are immune to some rather dreadful diseases that are out there, such as polio and smallpox and the like. So you are already an enhanced human. But you accept it, I'm sure, and I'm sure many of you would not want to part with that super immune system. And what we're really talking about here, and why I address this, is that this is a normative issue. Is that what might seem radical and extreme in terms of the kinds of abilities or immunities that we may have in the future, that by today they may seem extreme, tomorrow we will take it for granted. Now, there are 2 waves coming. One is quickly coming upon us, and the third will happen perhaps about half a century from now. The biotechnology revolution is certainly in full sway. We had the breakthroughs in mapping the human genome back in the 90s, and that's basically started a path toward us getting a handle on our biology. And then in and around 30 to 40 years from now will be the nanotechnology revolution. And I focus on nanotechnology in particular because it will take us to the next phase where we will in fact achieve this heralded state of negligible senescence. And I'll talk about each of these in detail. Okay, the second wave. At a broad level, we're going to develop the tools to reprogram our biology and its biochemical information processes. So in other words, getting a real handle on our biological makeup, what makes us tick. But not only what makes us tick, is understanding why these processes work, how they can be refined, modified, fixed, improved, and so on. As it pertains to life extension, the biotechnology life extension it really got started in the 70s, in the early 70s, when you had the American Aging Association formed under a fellow by the name of Denham Harmon, and he actually put forth the first idea of the free radical theory of aging. The free radical idea is that we have junk in our cells that are causing stress to our bodies that ultimately results in the aging process. Part of the aging process. Aging is a multifaceted problem that's a major contributor. In the 1980s, we had a book by Saul Kent entitled The Life Extension Revolution, and Saul Kent went on to talk, to actually found the Alcor cryonics group, which that's a topic for another talk, which is the whole idea of cryonics, and that's preserving people for eventual reanimation, that people upon death, they get stored in liquid nitrogen in hopes that a future civilization will bring them back to life. I guess that's a kind of life extension, but it's not one that I want to talk about here. I want to talk about avoiding that altogether. But the chronicists are apt to point out that being preserved in a vat of liquid nitrogen is probably the second worst thing that can happen to you. And then in 1983, Dr. Roy Walford, a life extensionist and a gerontologist, published a popular book called Maximum Lifespan. So we had these kind of seeds set in the 70s and 80s for what has now emerged as modern biogerontology and a kind of a paradigm shift in the medical sciences and how we view aging. It has spawned the careers of a number of biogerontologists, thinkers like Aubrey de Grey, Cynthia Kenyon, and Michael Rose. And these theories are more radical than ever, and a sea change is occurring in the medical sciences where we're now looking at aging. We're looking at aging and how it's perceived as a disease that can be cured, or at the very least a set of diseases that can be cured or solved. It's an engineering problem to be solved. And there's a huge potential for regenerative medicine and true anti-aging interventions, which I will get into in more detail a little later. Here's the big guy, Aubrey de Grey. I'm sure many of you have recognized this face. Very much the spokesperson and very emblematic of the life extension movement. He is I believe he's at Cambridge, and speaks with an extremely thick English accent. At least initially I had a hard time comprehending him, but I'm becoming quite much better at it. And of course he's very famous for the very long Methuselah beard. But he came up a number of years ago with what he called SENS, or Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. And he came up with 7 different causes for aging. He isolated them. And he came up with a pretty good list. These are 7 nasty things that happen to us, and I'll just quickly go over them, and not in any great detail. But things like cell loss or atrophy cell depletion, nuclear mutations and epimutations, mutant mitochondrial problems, death-resistant cells, extracellular crosslinks, junk outside cells, junk inside cells, things like telomerase fraying. Very technical stuff, but ultimately what's exciting about it is that they've nailed it, that they've figured it out, what it is about aging that causes our cells to age, to regenerate, to have copy problems. And that's the first part of the problem, is being able to phrase the problem. And now the next step is to actually go about, as Aubrey would say, is to create this engineered negligible senescence. But ultimately why that's important, why I've got Aubrey's face on here, is that he's helping put forth this idea that aging is not an inexorable process. It's not something that just happens and we have to deal with it and we can never do something about it. It is a process not unlike any other that happens in the human body, and given the right tools and the right know-how, it can be something that can be tweaked a little bit and perhaps halted altogether. How we'll come about this? Simply to further our sense of biotechnology and understanding of the human body. And there are already some technologies emerging that will help us along this path to help Aubrey and others do what they want to do. By the way, just as an aside, Aubrey has what's called the Methuselah Foundation, and you may have heard there's even a thing called the Methuselah Mouse Prize. And what they do, I believe it's on an annual basis, they do award an award to the clinical lab that has extended the lifespan of a mouse to the next maximal degree. So you have a bunch of labs around the world where they're experimenting on mice, giving it genetic tweaks, altering its diet, exposing it to different sitcom comedies. I don't know. But ultimately what they're trying to do is figure out how they can extend the lifespan, the maximal lifespan of mice. And they've done some pretty scary stuff in terms of extending lifespan to twice its normal lifespan and so on. And I'm looking forward to the day. I mean, many people may leave here, and certainly those that I speak to on a regular basis shake their heads in denial about this, but won't it be a remarkable day, a miraculous day, when we finally have that mouse in the lab that just simply refuses to die? It'll be akin to Dolly the sheep being cloned, perhaps even more so. will be a powder keg that will go off to change a lot of minds. But it will happen. I'm not sure when, but I'm sure it will. The kinds of technology that will help this come about, already we have regenerative medicine. Everyone's familiar, I think, with stem cells and the potential for stem cells. Well, what I can say is believe the hype. It's all true. It's all real. Stem cells have incredible potential for what they can do for to heal and to solve problems. I believe, for example, I know for a fact that they've actually, what a stem cell is what's called a pluripotent cell, or an undifferentiated cell. It's a special cell in our body that hasn't grown up yet, doesn't know what it wants to be in life. But given the right context, given its association with other cells, let's say a heart cell or a bladder cell, it says, okay, I know now what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be a heart cell. And it's, again, a lot of voodoo goes on in the background that we're not quite sure of as of yet, and it just simply knows what to do, where to go, and how to do it. And basically the lab technicians stand back and they watch the cells create a heart. In this case, it was a rat heart. And as well, they also gave it electrical stimulus that it would pump like a normal heart, and they have a heart emerging in the lab. I also believe, and I'd like to get the proper reference for this, but I've heard they've also snapped the spinal column of a mouse, and they've regenerated it with stem cells.
To suggest you need to explain the basis of this, that differentiated cells are only using a portion of the genome.
Yes, it's again that basically all the cells that come about in our body are from undifferentiated cells, correct? That is part of genetic expression.
What I'm saying is that differentiated cells
Right.
are only utilizing, they've been programmed to utilize only a portion.
There you go.
of the
Thank you.
genome.
Fair enough.
So, in principle, a differentiated cell can be reprogrammed back to be pluripotent. I think that's one of the avenues.
You know, and I think I have heard along similar lines that where a lot of the controversy comes with stem cells is not what we're going to do with stem cells, is where we get them from. That traditionally we get them from embryonic fetal matter. And yeah, there's some exciting work being done now. I personally have no moral compunction against that, but many obviously do, and that's why it's a huge political issue. But anything we can do to make something less political and actually start to get to real science and really helping people, I think is a good thing. So the fact that we can now extract stem cells from non-embryonic fetal tissue is a good thing. Also the potential for cloning, whether you love it or hate it, cloning is coming, and I think it's probably a non-issue. I think the number of people that would actually choose to clone themselves would be minuscule and probably would be lower than the amount of people that use in vitro fertilization. There's also the potential for real anti-aging supplementation. Again, I put these on the board here because these are actually coming very soon, if not already. Anti-aging supplementation. First of all, if anyone ever peddles something to you right now that promises to be anti-aging, they're lying. Nothing exists right now. But that is set to change. There is a company in the United States that has managed to isolate the only true anti-aging enzyme that has been found. And for those of you that drink red wine, you may be aware of this. There is a chemical compound, an enzyme in red wine called resveratrol. And it has been shown to have anti-aging qualities, that it actually does slow down the aging process to a very minuscule degree. It may also in part explain what's known as the French paradox. The French eat a very high-fat diet, high cholesterol, a lot of cheese, but as we know, they love a glass of red wine, but for some reason they have a very low rate of heart disease. And the belief there is that it's the resveratrol component in the red wine that's contributing to their good health. Well, the trouble is, if you want the kind of life-extending qualities that we're talking about in terms of real potent anti-aging, you would need to drink 1,000 bottles on a very regular basis to get the amount of concentration required. Obviously not possible. Maybe for some of you it is possible, I don't know. But there is a couple of guys in the United States, they've managed to find a way to concentrate this compound, resveratrol, into 1,000 times this potency, into a pill format. This pill exists today, and I'm sure those two guys are popping them on a regular basis. But it's still in clinical trials, and it'll be about 5 years before we see this hit the market. And once it does, that will be the first true bona fide anti-aging supplementation that you can take. So look for that, and I believe it'll be branded under the name Serotin. I can certainly confirm that for you later, but I think it's going to be called Serotin. So that's the second wave, biotech. The third wave is a bit more radical. This is where we get into that post-humanistic stuff, that post-biological stuff. And that is rebuilding our bodies and brains at the molecular level. and fixing the remaining problems that are difficult to address within the confines of biology. And then ultimately going beyond the limitations of biology altogether and creating new states of being and new ways of biological, I guess, post-biological functioning. That's a carbon nanotube, by the way, all you geeks out there. Now I'm going to focus on nanotech. Again, I could focus on perhaps the other biggies in and around this time, in around 40 to 50 years from now, but again, I think it would largely be outside the scope. I could talk about artificial intelligence and its impacts in terms, for example, of such things as whole brain emulation, the idea that we could actually copy the human brain, but not just copy it, but put it into a different substrate, like a digital substrate, the so-called upload, where we live a virtual reality existence. This is all part of the potential for post-humanity. But I want to kind of keep it at least embedded in terms that we can really perhaps grasp onto a bit better, and that is what nanotechnology can do for us in terms of re-engineering how our bodies work. Now, what is nanotech? Let me just kind of briefly explain just the kind of scale we're talking about. Yes, we're talking about moving matter at the molecular level, but just how small is that? The best way of imagining it is to take a dime and look at its thin end. Now slice that up 1,000 times. Take one of those slivers and now divide that yet another 1,000 times. You are now down at the nanoscale. The fact that we can actually manipulate matter at this scale certainly defies my imagination and my thought, but it's actually being done. IBM, they've been working on it. They actually wrote with the several molecules the logo IBM a few years ago, which is pretty famous. That got a lot of people interested in it. And just today, just while blogging, looking around the blogosphere, they've actually, with several clumps of molecules, made a happy face. That was really interesting. So they're doing it. That's about all they can do right now. But the idea is that we'll be able to work at that scale, not just to make materials. And there already, for example, there's the famous stain-resistant khaki pants that's made with molecular materials and nanotechnology. Yeah, this is true. But materials will be one significant aspect. But what's going to be more remarkable is when we get into molecular machinery, and then that is the actual creation of robotics or machines at the molecular scale. And I'll go into this now with this guy. He's a really smart guy, Robert Freitas. He's been around forever. And he's actually speculated about a whole bunch of things, including extraterrestrial intelligence and astronomy and other issues. But he's most famously known for his speculations into what's been dubbed nanomedicine, whereas nanotechnology is applied to the medical sciences. And he has actually designed, he's sketched it on his blueprints, schematics for the kinds of structures, the kinds of machines that we'll want to build at this level, and what they could do to supplement human functioning. For example, actually I'm going to back up just a little bit. Before we even get to Robert Freitas, a bit of context for nanotechnology. It was first conceived in the late 1970s by Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, but it was more fully articulated in the early 80s by Eric Drexler in his seminal book, Engines of Creation. And there, again, the difference between materials and molecular assembly. But the implications of integrating nanotechnology will be quite monumental, and again, it's going to have direct applications to the anti-aging application. Okay, red blood cells. By the way, if anyone kind of disbelieves that there are machines that can exist at this scale, you need to realize that a lot of the components that exist in your body at the microscopic level are not, they're simply that. They are machines that exist at the nanoscale. They work, they function according to physical principles and laws of mechanics. And the idea here is that we will start to make our own devices to supplement these existing ones or to fix the ones that are perhaps degrading. So, as I said, Freitas here has kind of come up with his own set of molecular robots. The one that he's come up with is a Resprosite, which is a red blood cell supplement. It's an oxygenating micro machine. I'll get into that in just a second. And then there are T cells, which are microbivores, which destroy microbiological pathogens found in the human bloodstream that what he calls digest and discharge protocol. And then there are actual cell repair mechanisms, devices that go through the body and actually repair, set up scaffolding, and repair damaged cells. Now, I want to focus on the Resprosite because it's the most coolest thing that he came up with. It's an artificial red blood cell. It would have an 18 billion atom structure. and it would give off 300 times the amount of oxygen that an organic red blood cell can carry. Why would we need such a thing? Well, exactly. Well, I'll get to that in just a second. From a medical perspective, you could have a heart attack, and your heart would stop beating completely. And you'd realize it at some point, and you'd think, I should probably visit the doctor and tell them that my heart has stopped. Because what has happened is that your respiratory have taken over. They're now taking over where your heart has failed. And it'll buy you an hour or two. You'll go to your doctor and say, Doc, I think my heart has stopped. And then he'll take the next steps required to fix you up, probably an artificial heart of some sort. So it would be an oxygenating compound that would work in that way, again, as a supplement to our natural occurring red blood cells. As Tallman noted, it could also be used in athletics, where you could run something like a 100-meter dash and not even have to take a breath. It could have profound implications in terms of deep sea diving and our ability to hold our breath underwater for an extended period of time. It would also eliminate the bends, I believe. And it can work to preserve living tissue. Oxygenating processes are definitely a part of aging and how living tissue works. And it would also provide treatment for things like anemia, choking, lung disease, asphyxia, and other respiratory problems. So this one little guy here has got some great potential. Now we can get to some real cool futuristic stuff here. Talking about virtual reality and mind uploading and such ideas. Is the nano-neural network, is the idea that eventually we can suffuse the brain with nanobots. Well, why would we want to do that? And here's an interesting scenario, perhaps might make for better science fiction today than reality, but it's one of the most interesting scenarios for the creation of virtual reality that I've ever heard. We are as conscious agents, of course. Outside of our senses, we are we have a thinking part of our consciousness, that self-aware aspect, the narrator that is us. But very much as part of what is our conscious experience is the sensory data that comes in, the five senses. And those five senses are coming in through our eyes and so forth, our ears, and they're all going to their the signals, those are all signals that are being interpreted at a specific part in the brain, whether it be the cerebral cortex, the audio cortex, and so forth, the visual cortex. What it is doing is it's converting the information coming in through the environment into a signal that the brain can understand such that it translates it to you, that you experience as your subjective reality. What a nano-neural network would do is these devices would suffuse the brain and occupy themselves in and around the areas of your brain that perform these functions and stop the signal. It would be a roadblock. So all audio information stops, all visual information will stop, taste, all those sorts of things. It'll hijack those signals and stop them. And then perhaps another nanobot in the same area will then, in its place, now transmit new signals, new audio information, new visual information, and so on. That's completely different and separate from the information you're getting from your environment, thus creating a completely different reality than you are engaged in. So in other words, it's fooling your senses utterly and completely, and you would be absolutely unaware that you are in fact in a different environment than your body truly is. This of course brings together some real interesting philosophical and existential issues. How do you know right now, for example, that you are not a part of a neural nano network? It brings together some Cartesian issues, brain in the vat type problems. But certainly, if we are going to think of ourselves, and again, this is a big part of transhumanist philosophy and post-humanist ideas, and it's certainly no stranger to science fiction with such things as The Matrix and other snow crashes.